Salutations, ladies and gentlemen, the Knife Raven here, back again with another video, and in today's video, well, today's second video that is, I'll be taking a look at a knife from one of my favorite makers, Michael May. Now, you might recognize this knife. I have probably shown it off quite a bit. This is my one and only Michael May custom, and it is made with 428 steel, brass bolsters, and Bog Oak handles. I really enjoy this knife, and I have consistently carried it and used it. It's one of my favorites, easily. It's comfortable in the hand, it's very stylish, and is just generally a knife that fits my personal preferences and aesthetic. Now, why am I showing you this? Well, it's very similar to another knife that I just got yesterday for my birthday, and that is a made-to-order knife off of Michael's website. And made-to-order means that this was a pattern that was requested enough from the custom builder that Michael just decided to release it as a made-to-order option, so you don't have to go through the process of using the custom knife builder. But this knife is extremely similar to the one I already have here, and I didn't even know I was going to get this. In fact, it was quite a surprise, because I had wanted a Michael May knife for a while, and my family didn't know what to get me. So I gave them, a list of 6 Michael May knives or so that I was kind of interested in, and just said, pick 1 or 2 if you'd like, and I'd be very happy with that. And this was one of them. And I am not disappointed in the slightest. This is the Lambfoot. Now, the handle shape is a Swayback, just like the Wharncliffe version, except again the blade shape on this one is a Wharncliffe as opposed to a Lambfoot. Both bolsters were mirror polished, but this one just patinaed over time. But the main difference here that you will immediately see is file work versus no file work. Now, I kind of wanted to try one of Michael's knives without that, and even though I prefer knives with file work, this is by far the simplest knife I have from him, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Fit and finish wise, you have very smooth pins. The bolster transitions are beautiful, and these are brass bolsters. I originally, when I ordered this knife, I had wanted nickel, because I was, how should you say, a normie, and I wanted the typical GEC case, Rough Rider kind of bolster treatment. Michael said he didn't use brass, or pardon me, nickel, and he only used brass, so I kind of begrudgingly took brass, and when it arrived, I developed a fancy for brass that I didn't really have before, and now it's become one of my favorite bolster materials, perhaps my #1 favorite bolster material on traditional knives. But again, bolster grinds are even, and they are very nicely polished. Spring, I believe, is carbon steel, is also polished, along with brass liners. And holding this knife up to the light, no light shines through, which means that there are no gaps here. Sometimes you can see what looks like a gap, but if no light shines through, then it's not really that big of an issue. Like there. You could argue that that's gapping, but when I hold it up to the light, I can't see anything shine through, so I'm not going to consider it a problem. One thing I love about Michael's knives is, unlike other makers who just sand the handle evenly all around, in this case this is an Arthur Wright, you can see that the wood is pretty much symmetrical from the top to the bottom, whereas with Michael's knives, he actually sands them less at the back and kind of gives them a bit of a bulbous end. And I really like that, because when you put one of these knives in your hand, it feels so much more comfortable in your palm than just a basic flat handle. Well, without further ado, let's open the blade. Got a nice nail nick here, no half stops. M. May, Sheffield, England, stamped into the tang. Strong spring, I would say this one is about a 7. It's certainly not a nail breaker, but it takes a bit of effort to open. We have that beautiful satin finished Lambfoot blade profile here. And while the Lambfoot is not my number one favorite, I probably would still give that honor to the Wharncliffe. It is still one of my favorite blade shapes compared to, say, even a sheepfoot or a hawkbill. I much prefer Lambfoots. They have a straight edge, just like a Wharncliffe, but the key difference here is the Wharncliffe starts to curve down to the point far earlier than the Lambfoot. Sometimes people will confuse them and say that a Lambfoot is a Wharncliffe when it isn't, or that a Wharncliffe is a Lambfoot when it isn't. But this is kind of your basic description. A Wharncliffe starts to curve down to the center, or should I say the tip, much sooner, and you will notice a gradual curve as opposed to a Lambfoot's much more aggressive and swift curve. But both have straight edges and both are easy to sharpen. Here's an example of another Lambfoot that I have here. This one gets a lot of use. This one is made by Arthur Wright and Son of Sheffield. You can see, again, very noticeable curve down there. That is certainly what I would consider to be a traditional Lambfoot profile. Again, it's not gradual in any way, shape, or form. It's just a very aggressive dip. And again, this is a carbon steel blade as well. So that is quite nice to me, at least. Aside from the blade shape difference, this is 01 tool steel, whereas this one's 420HC. And if you ever buy from Michael, you should receive one of these, and this is a little pamphlet that arrives with every knife, and it says, "Each knife is crafted to the highest standard from carefully chosen materials. Since learning my craft, I feel a responsibility to maintain the skills and artistry that made Sheffield famous. Michael May, your knife pattern is a Lambfoot, blade steel is 01 carbon, handle material is Bog Oak, the date of manufacture is April 23rd, 2023, and it is signed M. May." Here's his contact information, michaelmayknives.com. Inquiries at michaelmayknives.com is his email, and his address at Portland Works, Randall Street, Sheffield. So, this is always helpful in case you ever have any questions or queries. You can always just contact Michael from there. And yeah, so this is a carbon Lambfoot as opposed to my other Michael May here, which is stainless. But 01 tool steel has a significantly harder core than, say, C70, as showcased on this right here. And it does tend to be probably a little bit tougher to sharpen because of that. A corrosion resistance is low as it is carbon steel, so you will want to oil this frequently. My blade oil recommendation that I have probably mentioned before is this Kent of Inglewood Camellia blade oil. I'm not saying that this one is necessarily the best, but it's the one that I've used and it has worked very well. You can get them in larger bottles too, but either way, mineral oil will do just as fine. I wouldn't recommend using any food oils, say olive oil or avocado oil, as sometimes they can cause the pivot mechanisms to become all grimy, and it's just a very risky thing using those types of oils. But the handles here, again, are beautiful Bog Oak, which, as I've probably mentioned before, is oak wood that has been left in a peat bog, and it has been preserved. Sometimes you can even find people or animals that have been fished out of bogs perfectly preserved. And in the case of this oak wood, this particular piece here dates back around 5,000 years or so. So this is a very, very old handle, ancient to say the least. And I really enjoy Bog Oak for that, because not only do you have a very attractive, almost ebony-like hue to your wood handle, but you also get a nice texture with the oak, and the ability to say that your handle is, well, older than almost any well, not anything, but older than even some of the pyramids, so I feel like that adds to a knife a little. Not much, but for the conversation starter aspect, it definitely is a positive in my mind. We have a half swedge on the front. This is a signature thing for almost all of Michael's knives. So if you're wondering why your blade didn't get a swedge on the other side, that's just his trademark. I'm not sure why, but that's why that is. One thing I've noticed, and this is just with custom knives that are handmade, and there can always be slight irregularities, but I noticed that the bolster on the Lambfoot is a hair longer than the bolster on the Wharncliffe. And I don't know if that's, again, an irregularity or if that's intentional, but perhaps now Michael's using longer bolsters on his knives. I would like to say, I'm not considering this a Barlow by any means, but compared to, again, an Arthur Wright I have here, you can see that, oddly enough, the bolster on the Michael May is probably about double that of the Arthur Wright. And, again, I'm fairly certain that this is still not a Barlow, but you know, we're talking about longer bolsters. This one definitely would tick that box. But perhaps Arthur Wright just uses short bolsters for some reason. In the meantime, this is, again, a very nice blade for general purpose. It's got a nice edge to it. Michael's knives always come quite sharp. I have a piece of paper here to test the cutting potential. This one's already been used a fair bit, but you can see that there is a significantly sharp edge on this, which is nice. And I figured I should mention there is a stop pin made of brass, and with the significantly longer tang, you shouldn't have to worry about any blade wrap on these. The action's a little on the gritty side, but certainly not the worst. Blade centering is a little bit off, but again, I don't really care. Unless a blade is quite off, it doesn't really bother me that much, especially considering this was a fairly inexpensive knife. I believe these are around 69 to 70 GBP, Great British Pound, and that comes to about 80, 90 US, 100, 105 Canadian. So very, very reasonable if you're considering these are almost customs. No blade play whatsoever. A little bit of gunk up here. Transition from the spring to the blade is fairly good. There's just a tiny line right there. Blade straightness in the open position is, again, a little bit off, but it's not off enough that it really bothers me. Just enough that I'll notice it. So aside from the slightly offset blade and the little bit gritty action, which will wear in over time, the only complaint I have with this knife is the slightly proud spring. You can see that it's just up a hair. Nothing too bad, but it's a little bit frustrating. Again, I've heard some people say that Michael makes bad knives. That's a very strong spring, good grief. I don't believe that is true. I think he makes good knives, very good knives, if you're considering they're handmade, and for very reasonable prices. Again, people always say, oh, they're not GEC, they're not, Jack Wolf. No, they aren't, but they are cheaper than GEC and Jack Wolf. Well, secondary market GEC, that is. And they have a lot of personality to them. I'm not excusing the flaws, but for me, I'm not bothered too much by them. And I really, really enjoy this knife. So for me, you can hate this knife. You can say that it's not worth the money or that it has too many flaws to be justified. That's fine. That's your opinion. But to me, I really, really like this knife, and I think that it is one that I would recommend. Again, you'll have your slight irregularities, but in the end, you have a very nice quality, very pretty traditional knife from Sheffield. So thank you very much for watching. This has been the Michael May Swayback Lambfoot. And this is the Knife Raven, as always, signing off. Goodbye.